The big time stuff that I wish I had. The big time stuff that'll make you mad. The big time stuff. I like the big time stuff. I like the big time stuff that I never had.
Today, we're really excited to bring you Harrison Ford to our podcast, Market Meditations. This podcast's goal is to become better human beings so we can also become better investors. We typically talk a lot about the market. It's hosted by myself, Neal Mody, and Chris Haydel.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
And actually, it's not quite Harrison Ford we have. It's Josh Gans, which I'm more excited about.
Better choice.
He's oftentimes confused. Yeah, he's oftentimes confused as Harrison Ford. He's the Harrison Ford of economics, really.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
He's a professor.
Well, he's definitely an intrepid explorer.
He's a professor of economics at the University of Toronto and regularly stars as as an expert witness actually in economics, which I did not know was a thing until I met him. The thing I appreciate most about Josh is every one of our conversations leave me wanting more. And in fact, before we were starting the episode, I was trying to convince him to help me kick out my neighbor and he could move next door to me. I hope my neighbor doesn't listen to my podcast.
I assume they're listening in right now.
But Josh should be phenomenal to live next door.
Yes.
On our last episode, I was talking about how Josh really ought to rebrand himself as part of the Mythbusters crew, because we talked about big data and why it matters, and he quickly told us it was just all about statistics. We expect Josh to debunk lots of myths again today as he talks about his new book. Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, Josh, you started to put this book together rather quickly, and I wanted to ask what drove you?
Wait, tell us the name of the book. Wait. Tell us the name of the book and everything first, Josh. Give a small intro of yourself. That's better than my Harrison Ford one. Then you can launch into Inquisition mode.
Let's do something important first, because Chris talks about the book, but it's very important for me that anyone listening to this a few minutes in knows that the book's title is Economics in the Age of COVID-19, so you know where to find it. Because I'm here to sell that.
And we'll put it in the show notes for you as well.
Yes. And Economics in the Age of COVID-19 was clearly conceived under the duress of COVID-19. And Josh, tell me, what was your impetus for doing this, and really for doing it so quickly?
So the book was published April 21st, so just a few days ago. Some people on Twitter seem to claim that I had only done it because I had foreseen this entire crisis in January and started working then. Except that,
I believe it.
No, I didn't do that. I didn't do that at all. I started to get panicky about this crisis around the end of February. But I still ended up traveling for a conference or something like that, so I wasn't that panicky about it. But then eventually around the middle of March, everything started to close down and I decided not to go into work anymore. And after about a week of sitting at home, and basically all I was doing, I had hoped to do what anyone would do. I wanted to catch up on Netflix and HBO and stuff. But I didn't do any of that. I was just obsessing over the data and the numbers, and reading about, infection rates, and then reading about epidemiology and things like that. For no reason. I mean, I didn't have anything, any particular interest in this subject before. So I was doing that for about a week when I realized that I'm clearly not going to get anything else done. And so I decided to do what I do best, which is write a book. And the goal that I set myself was I wanted to write a 30,000 word book in 10 days, just to give myself a discipline, to be able to learn some of the stuff going on. And I needed to get it published as well, and it needed to be published quickly. Obviously, I could have self-published it, but then, that doesn't work so well. So I was fortunate that MIT Press, who had published a couple of my previous books, decided that that this would be a good opportunity for them to see if they could publish something in a timely manner. And so basically, a month and a little bit after I'd actually conceived of this idea, the book was published. And it was 40,000 words rather than 30,000 words. And I'm still going to have to update it. And there's going to be an updated edition in November as well. So it's a bit of an ongoing project. But really, my goal was to try and just sort out all these economic issues that were just flying at us during this time of just unprecedented crisis. And the book has 8 chapters in it. And when I started writing, the world was trying to grapple with the issues in chapter 2. By the time it was published, we were grappling with the issues of chapter 5. And so I think we're sort of slowly getting through the book as we deal with stuff. So it's been quite an interesting time, that's for sure.
Yeah, Josh, I'd have to say I've been fortunate enough to read the book, and I can understand why you've received that veiled criticism that you'd been working on it for a while. It's a pretty thoroughgoing analysis, or at least look at the various problems that emanate from this crisis. So thank you for tackling that. And
I should say, actually, I was aided by something I didn't expect, and that is, I wasn't the only academic economist to be sitting at home wondering what they should be doing. It is quite extraordinary, but so many economists around the world suddenly decided to drop everything and try to research one aspect or another of this crisis. And so the other stunning thing about this book, I thought I'd just apply economic principles, textbook, what are the trade-offs, blah, blah, blah. But maybe 80% of the citations are to papers that were written while I was writing the book. It is extremely timely. In fact, the book contains citations to papers that were released late last week. So it's really been, and that forced me to integrate a lot more things, and it allowed me, because people had insights, allowed me to really explore these issues far more richly than I had initially intended.
So now, in addition to the rapid spread of COVID and everything traveling at warp speed, we now have publishing. You're running a parallel experiment.
I wasn't the first. Actually, I should add, I said to my children, I said, the book was published. It's the first book on COVID-19. And of course,
I saw at least 20 or 25.
No, you go into Amazon, you type COVID-19, and it's quite an interesting set of stuff that comes up there. I mean, basically, I was nowhere near first on a book on COVID-19. I think there's
Yeah, but most of that stuff looked like junk. Just to throw that out there. I flipped through a bunch of the intros of those books, and I was not. Wow.
You weren't wowed by the. There was some very interesting ones. There was ones out there in the romance category that really seemed to pile on there. So I don't.
We could do the review show on the other books later,
okay.
Josh.
Well, I would be. No, people do fly into that. Make friends with COVID-19, Little Miller's fairy tale. I mean, come on. Love under quarantine.
That's a picture book. I think I've seen that.
Actually, it's not out yet. Only May 5th. Oh, come on.
We get release copies of lots of things early.
COVID poetry and lyrics in the COVID era. All right. So anyway, so it wasn't, but at least the marketing people at MIT Press said it was the first release by a mainstream publisher, and I think I'll take that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Josh, start to take us through some of your conclusions. Like,
Right.
you're obviously, we spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about some of the conclusions that Chris has on the broader market, and occasionally we take some bets for a charity related to that. But
Well,
if you start to share, because there's a bunch of different categories, would love to hear about them, and maybe start with the broader, and then I promise Chris will disagree with you everywhere he disagrees.
It's kind of interesting. So let me hone in on the sorts of themes that have come up in this podcast before, which is really this, what does the entrepreneurial opportunities or innovative opportunities look like from the coronavirus? And that's a bit more my bread and butter, thinking about those issues. And in what there's one chapter, a later chapter 7, about rallying innovation, and most of that was to do with how are we going to get vaccines and treatments, the sort of top order issues, which are still issues, but fortunately there are a lot of people pushing towards it for this particular virus. Still looks like it's going to be 12 to 18 months before we get a vaccine, but at the very least, people have jumped to action on that. But there's this secondary set of economic issues, and we, I'm a chief economist of the Creative Destruction Lab, and Neal, you're a member of that too. And one of the things that they did over the last month or so is decide to launch a new stream, quite accelerated, all online and virtual, as everything has to be, which is to offer advice, mentorship, advice on bringing to scale to companies dealing with various aspects of the pandemic. And it's called CDL Recovery. And it's got two aspects. One is public health, trying to bring about innovations that will directly improve health. And the other is on economic recovery, which is, we have this public health crisis, and we now have, related to that, of course, the economic crisis. And so the idea of CDL recovery is to sort of promote startups and others, actually, in being able to innovate very quickly and to try and do something in the next 6 to 12 months that can help. And so in the process of trying to think about that new experiment going on, and for all we know, I mean, who knows how many people, we know there's a lot of enthusiasm of people wanting to help innovate. How many good, solid ideas we'll get, it's always hard to tell. But I sort of think of them in terms of, moving away from the strictly public health stuff. I see the innovations as falling into two categories. And the way you think about those categories is by stepping back a moment and looking at the predicament we're in. So we currently there are activities in the economy, things that people do. And it used to be you were free to do all of them. And then the pandemic comes in, and either you don't want to, or the government is stopping you from doing a whole host of those activities. So you can imagine there are two buckets. There's bucket number one is the stuff you're allowed to do, and bucket number two is the stuff you're restricted from doing. As we come out of this, what we want to do is we want to obviously move stuff from bucket number two, the restriction bucket, to the unrestricted bucket. So one set of innovations that you can imagine are things that make it possible to do that, to make that movement. Something restricted becomes unrestricted. And we have to ask ourselves, why is something restricted in the first place? It's restricted in the first place because it involves somebody going out somewhere and potentially infecting a lot of people. And so we've shut down schools. They're a cesspool. No one trusted children to be able to wash their hands. That wasn't going to happen. They were definitely going to spread the virus. We know that, offices and other things like that were also hives for these. We know that the large events were problems in this regard, of course, but we really shut a lot down. Restaurants, confined space where people are sitting and burping and whatever for many hours and things like that. So we had to shut all that down. So what we want to do is we want to move activities out of there. And so one set of innovations is how do we make those activities that are currently ones we want to lock down safe to come out and to come out in a persistent way. That takes a lot of innovation. I mean, you just think about the schools problem. The schools problem is going to require some sort of intensive monitoring of school children. It's going to require some, maybe some redesign of how classes are taught or where they're taught and things like that. You can't begin. It becomes overwhelming when you start to think about it. But there's opportunities there to be able to move those things across. Workplaces, if they work out how to have proper protection, will be able to be safe and open up again. There are innovations that need to happen there. So I think that's one set of ones. Making activities that are currently considered unsafe, make them safe. The second is a set of activities is to do, well, what if you can't do that? How do we make life more comfortable? How do we enhance the economic value of the activities that are restricted? So we currently have to work from home. So everybody has celebrated Zoom as a great example of an activity, as something that exists. Everybody knows that if this had been COVID-99, boy, would we have been screwed. COVID-99 would have been terrible, in terms of what we were able to do. And we're in a position in the economy where a third of people, to varying degrees, can still conduct their work at home. It's a miracle that we should celebrate, but we can probably do more. We can probably do more on that front. And so there's a whole set of innovations coming in there. And so basically those are the two broad classes of opportunities that are available now. Once you realize which class you're in, you know how to sort of define your market and start focusing things. So it's actually fairly convenient. But that's the way I see it. I don't know what your opinions are on that.
Well, I thank you, Josh. That's fantastic. I was looking too at some of the suggestions that you had made, at the tail end of your book, very thoughtfully, about the Global Pandemic Response Unit and some more of the public policy issues. And I didn't know if you could comment on that. And you sort of talked, I guess, about these higher level possible structures. Yes. But I didn't notice if you had, I didn't see any comment really on stimulus or a sort of Main Street Marshall Plan, or if that even is advisable. Well, and I'd like to get your take on.
You are right. So there's a couple of ways. I mean, it's nice to find historic analogies. With regard to the sort of economic crisis we're currently in, people will think about stimulus. To be clear, everybody is kind of making this up as they go along. I mean, the striking thing is actually, with regard to, like the...
You say kind of. You say kind of.
Yeah. Well,
so
no. I mean,
completely making it up?
I don't think we've ever had such big numbers being spent
on
short-term things without any real consideration of what, long-term investments and other outcomes should look like. And that's worldwide. I mean, everybody's been doing this. And so regardless of whether you had a lockdown or not, everybody's had to have some sort of plan to make sure that people don't lose their jobs and businesses don't go under. Because what you want to have happen is is when this is over, you want people to just pick up and say and go back to whatever they were doing previously, because there was nothing wrong with what was happening previously. And so we're just trying to work out how to do that, given that the economy is set up to viciously punish people who don't pay. We didn't want that to happen. So all the money at the moment's been thrown at that activity. And a whole lot of it will be repaid for the same reason, because people will turn out they don't need it and stuff like that, or they'll have the ability to repay it later on. And so it's just like some of the stuff we saw in 2008 financial crisis. But there is this other issue, is that we don't want to do this again in this same way. And the way I see it in the book is that all of this stuff, the lockdown, the really big economic crisis that was caused by that, etc., was all because we stuffed up first time round. We stuffed up in January, February. We didn't get on this quickly enough. And in particular, we weren't South Korea. We didn't have in place a thoughtful testing regime and contact tracing regime to be able to target and, basically on the ground, quash the infections.
Well, that's partly because we don't have a unification issue with Canada and the United States.
Well, that's partly it. But I think that this is fairly worldwide. I mean, really, only Taiwan and South Korea were the only ones who really got onto this, and they did so because they already had SARS, and I think, I have read about it because I didn't have to experience it, but SARS was pretty frightening. SARS did have that lockdown, right? SARS, had a 10% fatality rate amongst all people. So it was quite an experience. So they had that. China had that too, but for various reasons, let it get beyond. Although when you think about it, they did pretty darn well to keep that contained for their purposes too. But so all we've been trying to do with these lockdowns, etc., is get us back to the rates of infection that would allow us to do what South Korea does, and that is to have testing and tracing. Now, the problem with that is we're not using the lockdown in any of these countries to do that properly enough. There's been some moves on contact tracing. Apple and Google and others are providing things, but, that's got to be the health authorities got to get it together. And even if we think miraculously about how quickly, apps can be released and what have you, it's a pretty daunting task. So we're really behind in that regard. And so, yeah.
But Josh, may I ask, I think, one of the things that sort of contradicts the suggestion of Neal about the lack of coordination seems to be the case of Germany, where things are decentralized. There's no central NIH or CDC or anything.
Well, you don't need centralization. You just have to have a plan. So Germany had a plan, and also I think we're discovering is that they understood better when to be testing people. So, in other words, so the issue with this virus, and I'm not an epidemiologist, so I hope I'm getting this right, is you become infected. There's 3 to 5 days, maybe the whole lot, where you don't show any symptoms. And then you might start to show symptoms. And then it might get really bad. And when it gets really bad, that's when we were putting people into hospitals and when we were getting them tested in Canada and the US and other places as well. The problem I think we're discovering with that is that was too late, because this virus, when it moves into a major respiratory failure, you'd actually that's a pneumonia, and it's not just a mild pneumonia. By the time it's got to that, it's already bad pneumonia. And at that point, you can shove people on ventilators, you can do all sorts of things to them, but there's actually not much you can do. And so it's kind of been too late. Whereas in Germany, as I understand it, people were getting tested much earlier, and getting monitored and having their blood oxygen levels monitored and other things much earlier, so that they never got to these advanced stages of pneumonia. So that allowed their rate of death to be vastly lower than anyone else. And maybe that was unplanned. Maybe it was just part of the system they had or not, whatever. But it just shows how difficult it is to manage this. There's just the information flows were very poor. There's still, I have a list of stuff we still don't know about this virus, and it's an extremely long list.
Have you published that list, by the way, anywhere?
No, I haven't yet. I'm going to have to work out how to get it verified in case someone does know that. It's stuff that I don't know that I haven't been able to see. I mean, I'll tell you what's on. I'll tell you what's on it. One, are we immune? If you get the virus, are you immune? We don't know. Will we have low-cost testing? Anything that allows something to be tested quickly with a good, reasonable amount of accuracy. 3, do children spread the virus? Kind of important to know. We don't know if they actually spread it. I mean, if they can go to school and they don't actually spread it for some reason, that's would be very useful to know. We don't know what the mental health issues are here. We don't know what the long-term damage of even having the coronavirus with mild symptoms is for your lungs. We don't know if we let this go how many would get sick. We don't know if it's seasonal, and not that it's actually seasonal, but if it's going to migrate around the world and coming back all the time. And of course, we don't know whether we're going to have a vaccine, and we don't know if we try to get people to wear masks, whether they will or not. These are the kind of things. I mean, it's just a lot of stuff that we don't know, and each one of them is like critical for deciding what to do. So it's really quite disturbing. In many ways, this pandemic shouldn't be thought of as a epidemiological problem or an economic problem, but an information problem. The problem is the information. Pandemics aren't an issue if you know who's sick.
Right.
You know who's sick,
right.
You take him out.
He means quarantine.
That's what you do.
Just to be clear.
You go on old-style leper colony on those people. No, I mean, don't have to do that.
Spoken like Michael Bloomberg.
No, but what I mean is that's the problem. The problem with this particular thing is we don't even know the base stuff. And so testing is the obvious thing comes to mind. If you could test everybody tomorrow, if everybody could walk every day and do a test, we know we'd have this licked right away. Because you could just take, you're positive, go isolate. And we're done. So we really could manage it. We could even manage it even if people aren't immune. We'll be able to manage it if that was the case. We could just wipe it out. So I think we have to understand that this is this deeply information problem, and so that means that you don't actually need everybody to coordinate or have one central thing, etc. But the reason I mentioned the Global Pandemic Response Unit was the information problem. If I had my druthers, and ignore for the fact that I don't know anything about international politics or any stuff like
Please
this,
pontificate a fair amount then.
I'm going to pontificate regardless. Why not? I would, I imagine a crack team, a real crack team, who the second there's a whiff of a virus anywhere in the world, they come in and they have authority to lock the place down no matter what country it is and no matter who's taken out. No matter whose human rights are stomped over by that, basically, is kind of what you have in your mind there. This emerged in Wuhan, in China. This particular thing, we relied on the local government in Wuhan to deal with it. And they have a whole lot of conflicted incentives in that regard. But it's not just them. You can imagine this too. What about the mayor in Jaws? He didn't handle things too well either, right? Because he had conflicted incentives. It can happen anywhere. People do that. And I also remember just early on this crisis, I'll freely admit this, I was sitting there thinking about, you were about to go through a border somewhere and they're going to ask you a question. And what if you had a bit of a cough? Did you want to actually say as you were going through you had a bit of a cough? I know it's the legality, of course you should, but but I mean, just thinking about human nature. I mean, people have conflicted incentives, so you need this team, you need this unit that can go in and do stuff, and the WHO. Has a lot of that charge of gathering the information, but they have none of the authority to be able to go and do something. And think of how much we would have saved in lives, economy, etc., if this could have been nipped in the bud. And that's the kind of thing that we have to collectively decide to agree upon that we as a world are going to do.
So do you think that'll happen now? Go ahead and pontificate more for us.
Well, I'm, no, I don't know.
That's not a yes.
No, I don't. No, I don't think it's gonna. The end of the book, I'm sort of trying to speculate on that, and I ended the book, and my editor sort of said, "Well, this is a downer." I said, things like the IMF and the United Nations were collective things we ended up doing to respond to global crises of the past. And the thing I start thinking about that is we needed 2 world wars to make that happen. So the problem.
The next pandemic should bring it about.
Yeah, I mean, one pandemic may not be enough, and moreover, this is a pretty lucky pandemic. I mean, just think about it. No, it really is.
No, just put those words together by themselves. Lucky pandemic. No,
it is. It is a lucky pandemic. So if you've watched the movie Contagion, it's not that. Okay. So it didn't cause people to sort of like suddenly drop dead the second they got infected the day later without any chance of care. It didn't affect the children. Imagine what we would be doing now if it had affected the children, right? Yeah. It would be a very, very different set of events. And, I know we like to talk about every life is equal, et cetera, but when I say how it would have been with affected the children, we feel differently about these things. And not only that, the people who are risky feel differently about it too. It's kind of what makes us human, right? But those are the things that could happen. And there's no reason why this virus acted in the way it did. There's no evolutionary reason why it was taking out the, more risky for the elderly. There's none at all. I mean, it's just,
the elderly and the infirm.
Right. I mean, it helps it because it means we are, from an evolutionary point of view, not reacting as strongly to stamp it out as we would have if it had been more widespread. So it sort of helps it from an evolutionary point of view. The other thing that helps it from an evolutionary point of view is that same factor is precisely because it is causing discord. A virus is going to be less successful if we take action to it. If it hits everybody equally, we're more likely to take action to it. If it hits one group more than others, we get divided because the costs are more widely spread than the benefits of dealing with the virus. So, it has that property, but it easily could have gone different ways. I mean, it's just happenstance and luck. So when you think about that, I don't have confidence that everybody in 2 years' time, when this is licked, are going to sit back and say, well, now we need to really do something about this and come together. I don't. That doesn't seem
well, if we can't count on governments to do it, Josh, maybe we can incentivize Disney's Marvel Studios, since they're idle, to give us a global pandemic response.
Maybe. Actually, the analogy you're looking for is we're looking for the Thunderbirds. We need international rescue. Do you know that show? Do you remember the Thunderbirds?
Yes, I do.
Animatronic puppets. I used to love that show. Yeah. But basically, this was a private organization and set up by a former astronaut who seemed to be loaded. and have access to space-faring technology of this kind that Elon Musk can only dream about, and would run around and basically handle situations. Now, they had to be called in to do so.
Right.
And my concern at the moment is, in many respects with these pandemics, we need something that has authority to come in and deal with stuff. We have some of this within countries. Within countries, there are some places that have authority to come in and deal with stuff. But I think we need to have that expertise globally and monitoring and other things like that, I suspect. But I think that will be very hard to get an international agreement on. Although some countries could sign up to it. But, as we know, a virus can come through anywhere. So, so who knows?
Yeah. And we can even see, of course, the domestic resistance in states.
Oh yeah,
like Michigan, Florida.
I mean, I think. I mean, that's small and vocal and makes for good news. But I think there are a lot of people. I mean, it would be crazy to think that people aren't sitting at home thinking, is this really worth it? And it's and moreover, we don't 100% know whether it's worth it or not. Because there's so much uncertainty, we don't really, really, truly know if it's worth it. We just know that this was the safest thing to do now. And so I can imagine people are going to have all sorts of different views. I'm watching this. The news in Australia. Australia managed to beat down this thing, which is actually quite interesting. They had more testing and stuff like that. My toy hypothesis is the virus spreads indoors and not outdoors, and Australia was at the time outdoors, and so it didn't spread as much. That would be my guess, but they have, and they're getting down to almost zero cases. Same with New Zealand, and they haven't opened up those countries yet, but they will. They will start to do. There's huge pressure to do so, and you can see this in the United States, and I'm sure it'll happen here in Canada. As these numbers start to fall, people are going to say, "When can we get out? When can we go?" That's going to be quite a bit of pressure. And I personally, if I had to speculate, is we're going to unlock slightly too early, and we're going to be all back in lockdown in the fall.
Yeah. You think that speculation holds water, that we won't be as prepared in the fall, and that we might have to suffer another lockdown?
I think we will, and I worry that I really would prefer the messaging to be, if they do release the lockdown, it should be, okay, it's not we're done yet. It's you have a month or two to get your house in order, to make sure you've got the stuff you need to go back into a lockdown in the fall. You should be expecting it to occur. If you're a business, you should be setting yourself up to be able to go remotely. Nobody's sort of saying, "Oh, I couldn't take my desktop home because it has a lease on it," or something like that. Fix all that and be able to deal with it. So, I mean, I think those are the things that, and the schools have to be prepared for it too. Just watching what they've been sort of grappling with and stuff like that. It's been very, very difficult. It's been good in the circumstances, but not what you want to do. In a repeated way.
Yeah. My wife's a public school teacher, and just the reach of technology doesn't always extend to a lot of her students.
The only place in the world. So Ontario signed a deal with Apple for 20,000 iPads to assist with this thing. But I haven't heard very much of that, actually. There hasn't been very much of that going on, and I think it sort of needs to happen, because I don't think we're going to have a lot of school years, and there's only so much we can. It's only so long you can do without. Look, if we miss half a term, it's not the end of the world for the kids' future. Blah blah blah. It's mostly about parental mental health. But if it goes on into the fall, and who knows what sort of things. And moreover, we want schools to be empowered. We want schools. If there's an outbreak in a school, if there's someone tests, we want them to be able to shut that down right away and send everybody home. Well, that's going to be a problem. The parents are going to be pissed off if they don't have preparation for that.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh, for that.
Sorry.
Look forward. No, it's great. I also wanted to ask, part of your global pandemic response unit idea, I thought intriguing because you had it sort of broken down into the precedent like Bretton Woods, where, we have this sort of supranational organization that can be called into action like the Thunderbirds, but also the other part of that was a sort of Manhattan Project, sort of innovation lab. Just in your vision of that, would it be a coordinating organization? Because it seems we, of course, have these research labs spread out through the world.
I think, look, there's many different ways you could do that. But I think, I've read in various places, and this is something I will want to explore more in the updated edition, is people talk about platforms for vaccines. So, rather than doing what we do with the flu every year and try to deal with whatever the strains they predict are going to be the bad ones, which is essentially what's going on, we have some way of being just better vaccines that deal with that help people more. That would be the basic thing. And so I don't know what's possible in that regard, but I do know we've not devoted nearly enough to that, given the cost of what we're facing. And so the explorations that we need to do in basic research in medical science are just phenomenally much, much bigger than anybody ever appreciated. We have been really, really trying to do our research on, these blockbuster drugs for certain treatments more so. But vaccines, preventative care is much harder, because the problem with preventative care is it doesn't give you an ongoing stream. I mean, the returns are not there in the private system in the same way. Also, because with preventative care, you want to give it to everybody. So there's only so much you can earn from that. I mean, there's a reason why the drug companies set their prices so high. It's because setting it lower doesn't get them as much money. Very simple as that.
Keeping it
very
simple.
But the consequence of that is that fewer people have access to it. But we can't have that with a vaccine. Everybody's got to have the damn thing. So I think this is going to require that big push going there. I wonder. This might be for the editing. I think we've lost Neal again.
Yeah, but carry on.
So I think I think, and the Manhattan Project is right. I mean, the Manhattan Project was a very speculative thing with high upside return. If at the time, anyway, obviously not for the rest of the world, but at the time, high upside return. You could end this war. That's pretty good. Or actually, in the case of the calculation, not lose it in that way. They thought they might lose the war, but the Germans might get there first. So, but this is the same sort of thing that we're facing now. I mean, people warned about it. Bill Gates warned about it. All of this. And so how to say, and people come up with these philanthropists. I sometimes get asked this, if you had $1 billion to spend on anything, what would you spend it on? And I'm like, I don't know. It's hard, I can't think in those terms. But what we're not talking about is if you had $500 billion to spend on something, what would you spend on? And it would be this. It would be this. And if we can do this, maybe we can handle some of our other problems as well. But let's start with this.
And Josh, why this, say, versus other problems which are also pressing, like global warming? Is it the intensity of this, acuteness of this threat?
Well, I think
that feeds into the cost benefit.
Yeah, I mean, there's this nice, interesting trade-off. If we don't do anything about this, we might end up curing global warming by getting rid of ourselves.
Fix the pension crisis. Many things.
Exactly. I mean, actually, it is quite interesting. If I were an environmentalist, I would be sitting there now saying, how do we convince people of what is going on outside is the thing that they want? Because in many respects, there's been an interesting, we've been locked up and stuff like that, and we've stopped consuming a whole lot of things. Lots of material things, blah, blah, blah. We just stop doing it. And the question is the world right now primed nicely to be able to start doing some of that other, maintenance on the house issue? Dealing with pandemics is one thing, but, global warming, pollution, cleaning up, etc. Precisely because people maybe feel they don't need the money to spend on their own personal consumption as much. And so I do wonder, if one of the outcomes of that could be a sort of softening and a realizing that, look, if we're willing to do this, I mean, here, let me put it this way: if we're willing to depress the economy in order to save our grandparents, why aren't we willing to do the same thing to save our grandchildren? It seems fairly staggering to me that wouldn't be the outcome of it. Now, the problem is I don't know who could communicate that in the bring it all together. It would certainly have helped if the leader of the free world was able to articulate those sorts of cases. And I don't believe that that Joe Biden has it in him either. So, I don't know where that comes from, but it seems like there is this opportunity to start thinking about what this really meant, because this generation and the previous generation hadn't really had a really sucky time of it like this. The last time when the pandemic of 1918 brought about national health insurance to most countries, and even whatever there is in the US came of that as well. That's the sort of thing that comes of it. There were all manner of things that came in terms of the attitude after World War II. I know I've had many dinner conversations recently trying to think about, what would it have been like to be in the middle of World War II and not knowing what the outcome was going to be. And we're in this world this time, we kind of feel, I mean, I don't think anyone feels that the outcome's not going to be we get through this. So we don't have that existential thing going on. But, it's still, there's got to be some moment for reflection there.
It's certainly uncertain, after COVID's been tamed, your words, Josh, what the world will look like. And it's certainly, what did Angela Merkel call it? An orgy of speculation?
Yeah. I mean, my concern is that people will just go back to normal and not think about it. That's the concern. I think we have good precedent to think that might happen. But we don't have the same visceral accounting that occurs, which caused us to go the other way with regard to terrorism. Almost 20 years since 9/11, and we're still paying the terrorism price all over the place, right? But partly because no politician has the guts to risk another event. So that's where you sort of fly the other way. But pandemics and stuff, well, no one's going to know. I mean, I think the other thing about World War I and World War II is they happened within a generation, within the same mindset. I don't know when the next pandemic is going to come after this one. On just sheer probabilities, it's near certain it will. If it came very quickly afterwards, maybe then people would say, well, enough is enough and start getting their act together. But, if it doesn't, which is not a bad thing necessarily, when it comes the next time, it's going to be just worse. So this is the kind of silliness that we live in, that we've been unable to solve these problems.
Yeah. Well, Josh, there's so much to weigh in the balance. As an economist, I think the intensity and duration of the economic fallout will change the calculus there too.
We don't quite, and we don't really understand that at the moment, because when there were recessions previously that sort of just happened out of the blue, and we had to work out how to restart the economy, and businesses had to go, and financial systems were in the crapper. it was going to take a long time, and there were people suffering and didn't quite know when they were going to get back to work. Now, there is some of that now, but we don't actually know the extent of it, because we don't know the extent of the 10, 15, 20% of people currently officially out of work who really feel they're out of work, who really won't, as soon as the lockdown goes, go straight back to where they are currently. Now, I think it's not going to be quite like that, because I think, there's some industries that are going to be slow going. I don't think a restaurant industry is going to be particularly bubbling, and tourism is in a real trouble, and there's all sorts of ones like that. So there are things along those lines, but it's not the same. I don't know why this happened. People do understand why it happened, and they know what the first thing they're going to try and do is go straight back to their original job, and they probably got no indication that won't be happening. But we just don't know how easy or hard that will be from this. We just don't know.
Yeah. Taking us out even a little farther, Jim Bianco, the eponym of Bianco Research, the macro researcher out of Chicago, he's speculated that this will bring about the advent of a new reserve currency, which he believes will be a digital currency. We don't have to speculate that far out, but that is quite a grand change.
Yeah. Everybody sort of like picks their own favorite project and sort of says, now's the time for whatever.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I've worked at a digital currency. I don't see it.
Right.
I don't see it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess the first issue is the long predicted change in the reserve currency.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's been the whole constraint here. I don't think, I don't think the lack of a reserve currency. I mean, we haven't had wild fluctuations in currencies actually during this crisis. We had wild fluctuations in the stock market, which, by the way, still doesn't know what the hell it's doing. None of that makes any sense as it is. But
it's a big Rorschach
and we're having this interesting thing going on with the oil price.
Yes.
Which is a whole, which is a portend of what will be if we do something about climate change. But
well, it gives the starch to your argument about the unpredictability of human nature, and we had a demand shock caused by COVID, and then Saudi Arabia decided to throw on a supply shock on top of it.
And then the US effectively had joined OPEC. I mean, because essentially the president of the US went and negotiated reductions in oil production. Well, that didn't actually happen, but nonetheless, at least wanted to. Which, I mean, let me tell you, my understanding of any US politics over the last 40 years has been not to get oil prices up.
Well, that was before we became the world's leading producer.
Okay, so that's now
13 million barrels per day.
So now we're happy to do that.
Yeah, but that our production though is mostly shale oil, and that's more expensive and generally harder to start and stop. More expensive than conventional oil.
Right.
So it's more precarious business to try to reduce or change production. The profile.
Indeed. I'm getting a Neal Mody thing saying that we need to wrap it up and he can't do anything, and so I think it's up to you, Chris, to wrap it up. And then we have to somehow save this. So I think he's just sweating there.
Yeah, my friend Neal. Did he send me a message too? Yeah.
I will leave my browser open. All right, so.
Well, Josh, any other thoughts on this as we close? You mentioned you were adding some chapters to this book, which, again, I thought was pretty thoroughgoing for such a tightly bound and quickly executed work.
Yeah, I think there's some
What
things.
questions are you still trying to answer?
Yeah, there's some more things to do. I think I need to think more about inequality, which was the subject of my previous book, and I have not done that here. I think we're going to have some interesting issues regarding privacy and transparency that we will learn about over the next couple of months that I'll hopefully be able to write about. The need to communicate clearly to public what's going on, the need to be very transparent. And then when we get to contact tracing, what are the trade-offs regarding privacy? So I think that's all coming there, and so that's what's on my agenda for the next edition.
Well, fascinating. This has been framed in terms of a war, and I guess there are many analogous situations that we can compare it to. But yeah, I think coming out of wartime, what economic shocks can we expect?
Yeah.
And what
I don't know what post-traumatic stress disorder is going to look like. It's kind of different when you're watching the Tiger King at home.
I'll ask my wife to chime in.
I mean, I don't know what's going to be the first time after a few months of seeing someone you knew before. Like, you're not on Zoom.
Yeah.
3D.
Yeah. Well, I lived in China for a while, and I've been very fascinated by how they've tried to reopen the economy, and just trying to pay attention, even as in an armchair in Pasadena. So how much can I really know? To see the tools they're using, and they have these 4 bordered plexiglass screens that they put in between you in restaurants, so you can sit in your own cone of silence next to your dining partner, which is a sort of strange
There's
thing.
a lot of strange stuff that doesn't make sense. I do think that someone working out how to do a fashionable face mask will work out. I'm waiting for Johnny Ive to come up with his face mask.
That's right. Right. Well, thank you, Josh Gans. Really, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm so glad you were able to join us today. And please, everyone who's listening, take time to search out this book. Josh, the
Economics
title?
in the Age of COVID-19, published by MIT Press, available as an ebook right now.
Right at your fingertips, everyone. Please give it a read. It's really fascinating and thought-provoking. Thank you, Josh, again for joining us. I appreciate it.
The big time stuff that I wish I had. The big time stuff that'll make you mad. The big time stuff. I like the big time stuff. I like the big time stuff that I never had.